Salut, bonjour, c'est Monsieur Springer. I would like to give you a brief tutorial on how to do the conversation, which is one of the free response activities on the AP exam. As just a little review of the structure of the exam, the first half, 50% of the exam, is all interpretive communication. That means reading authentic texts, listening to authentic French audio, and then answering some multiple choice questions about what you understand. The second half of the exam is free response, meaning you're producing the language, whether spoken or written language. And the conversation part is, I think, is really neat. It's you're partaking in an actual simulated conversation, just like a real conversation, and the one person has something to say, and then you need to respond appropriately each time, or ask the appropriate question that's going to elicit the next response. So it really requires some critical thinking on your feet in terms of what to say, because you never know what's coming at you. At the same time, you do know a little bit, and I'll show you in a minute. Like I mentioned in the free response portion, there are 4 different parts that you're doing: the email reply, persuasive essay, conversation, and cultural comparison. And I just want to make a quick note that the whole point of the free response section is to show what you know in terms of language. That being said, the more language you can produce, usually the better. Okay, you have, for instance, you can see in the time frame for the conversation, you have 20 seconds to record each response. The more that you can record, the more of that 20 seconds that you can fill up actually recording le français, right, yourself speaking, the better chances are you're going to have a higher score, because you're showing the AP readers, that's what we call those that grade the test, AP readers, you're showing them your skills in the language. All right, let's take a look at this first conversation activity. So you have the instruction, which are always in français and anglais. You'll have a minute to preview the conversation. That means read this little preview of it, which is kind of like a roadmap. I want to note that during the actual AP exam, you have that in front of you while you're recording. And so I'm going to instruct you to actually be looking at that while you're recording the responses. And then you have, when it's your turn to speak, you have 20 seconds to record your response each time. So you'll listen to what the other person has to say and then record your response. Again, like with the email reply, you're going to want to click on Barème to carefully read through the rubric. This is how I will grade you. This is how you'll be graded on the AP exam. There's a lot to be said here. Like I was saying, that the more language that you can include, the better. That's that first criteria on there. Maintains the exchange with appropriate responses and elaboration. It's not a simple oui or no. It's going to do it. Just to be as complete and creative as possible to show how much of the language you can produce. And the first few times you do this, it's going to be really awkward. That's okay. Don't be afraid to experiment, and don't think that I'm going to think you're a poor French speaker or silly, because it's difficult even for me to respond on the spot with some of these things. But working through that awkwardness will get you to where you want to be proficiency-wise. To get a 5, some other things to mention are that you are understood. It's really important, more than anything, to communicate clearly. That's much more important than correct grammar structures. Grammar is a tool for clear communication, but in the end of the day, can the listener understand your response? Notice how it says fully understandable with some errors. Even under a 5, it's okay to have some errors. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. And then I also want to point out this clarification or self-correction, if present, improves comprehensibility. That means that if you're speaking and you make an error, if you correct yourself, that would be fine. For instance, let's say I was trying to experiment with using a relative pronoun, making a complex sentence like la personne à qui je parlais, la personne à qui j'ai parlé. I just caught myself in the middle of making the error using que instead of qui, so I went back and just said it again. Those type of things are actually deemed as a positive trait in your response, as long as you're not detracting from the meaning. So just know that that's okay. All right. Going back to the activity, let's check this next one here. This is kind of the roadmap, or we call this, in class, I'll call it le contexte de la conversation each time. This is like what I said, this is kind of giving you the roadmap of the conversation, what the context of it, what the conversation's all about, okay? Which is super important. You have to understand that in order to appropriately do the conversation. And then what Eric in general is going to say, and then what you in general should respond. So it kind of gives you not exactly what to say, but the direction in which you want your response to be headed. Now, when you go to the conversation itself, you could actually hear what Eric is going to say. And so your response really needs to go with what you hear, not just with what you read on the sheet. But nonetheless, it's good to have this in mind as well, because maybe you have a difficult time really grasping anything that Eric says, which it wouldn't be out of the ordinary for an AP French student, especially at first, to have a hard time to hear the audio or to understand the audio. That's normal. So this gives you a little bit of an idea, even if you don't understand every word, it gives you an idea of where Eric is headed and therefore what you should respond. Make sure you do follow this in terms of the vous, what you're supposed to say. And I also want to make one little point here, going back to the rubric. Notice how to earn a 5, that the person who earns a 5 will have consistent use of register appropriate for the conversation. Register means talking in a formal or informal setting. So formal would be with vous, right? If you're talking to a doctor or an adult or a stranger that you don't know well and you need it to be polite, you definitely want to use vous. But if you were talking to a friend or another student, even if you don't know them that well, if it's another student, you should probably use tu. So the insightful student will carefully, determine the context of what this conversation is. And here, c'est une conversation avec Eric, un camarade de classe, right? So that's key. You're not going to want to use vous. You're going to want to use tu with Eric. Some of the conversations you'll have throughout the units are tu. Some of them are more of a vous setting. So keep that in mind because you want to have the register correct. Make sure you're using either formal language with vous and things like le conditionnel to be real polite, things like s'il vous plaît, or you're using tu, a little more informal language, even a little bit of argot, like slang if you know it. That's okay for informal, but not for formal. Finally, let's go to the actual activity itself. But before you do, like I mentioned, you're going to want to have this open in front of you while you're actually completing the conversation. And here's a couple different things you could do. You could open up another tab and open up CAP and open up your course there. That's a little dangerous though. I would never really want to have 2 tabs of CAP, the learning management system, open at the same time because that's been known to cause problems with submitting your assignment. What I recommend instead is taking a screenshot of this page here each time you do the conversation activity, each unit. You're going to have this activity, le contexte de la conversation, and then the actual screen where you submit your work. So I use a program called Jing. There's also Snagit, and there are a lot of other ones, and I'm just going to use it real quick to take a little screenshot. Jing is for free, by the way, Jing. If you just do a Google search, you can download it. Snag image, and then I could save it or copy it to a Word document, but honestly I'm just going to leave it open here in the actual Jing app. That way when I go to the next activity I can just go to my Jing icon in my tray below the screen and just open it up and view it. Another instance is you could print it out if you wanted to. So it's up to you, but I do recommend having that open, and I don't really recommend having it open in another tab. More than one tab of the course open has been known to cause some issues with assignment submission. So got the context. What I'm going to do from here is obviously listen to all of Eric's responses, well, one at a time actually. I'll listen to what he has to say, and then I will respond. You have up to 20 seconds, okay? Now on the AP exam and later on this year, I'm going to hold you to that. You don't want to say more than 20 seconds. Um, is it a huge deal if you say more than 20 seconds right now? Not really, but I doubt most of you are going to want to speak more than that anyway. But here's the kicker. Don't just say 2 seconds of a response. Remember, the free response activities, the whole point is to show what you know. So the more you can respond, the better. And guess what? For now, if you record and don't like your response, delete it. I'll show you how. So let's say I've played this. I'm going to click here to record. Salut, bonjour. I'm done. I can play it back for myself. Salut, bonjour. Right? And if I don't like it, I can just click X and do it over again. Okay? Feel free to experiment with that. Okay? Like I mentioned, later on in this semester and maybe next semester, I want you to more simulate like you're actually taking the exam. Do it all, without really redoing it and holding yourself to the time constraints. But for now, experiment with getting a quality response. I want you to have fun doing it and just get a feel for what it's going to take to have a quality response. Keep in mind the rubric. I would print that out, keep it in a notebook with you, and keep in mind, like we said before, le contexte de la conversation. When you do, I trust you're going to have a great response, and I think that you'll have fun trying to fit into the conversation with Eric.